So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good part of day, everyone. Welcome to the largest, fastest growing, and the most active um, community of organizational design, system thinking, product-centric development called Large Scale Scrum. It originated in New York City back, I think, in 2015 and has gone viral ever since. We're pushing 8,000 members. So please help us build up those numbers. Today we have a very special guest, my all-time friend, a very good friend, a highly ranked and respected professional, Dhaval Panchal. Um, Dhaval is a programmer at heart with 20 plus years of working in the trenches with executive management. Has a lot of entrepreneurial experience. He's passionate about catalyzing change in systems where leaders empower others to excel. He's the founder of Evolve Agility, that's his company. And he has led multiple large-scale agile transformations for companies in oil and gas industry, banking, insurance, gaming, medical devices, business, etc. He brings a lot of system thinking perspective to the world of coaching, and he works very closely with CTOs and heads of software development, engineering, DevOps, data, and project management. Dhaval is a strong supporter and very well informed, intimately, I would say, informed with organizational design system called Large Scale Scrum. And he is the honorable guest today. So without any further ado, I'll pass the baton over to you. Dhaval, thank you for being here. And please take it away.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you for joining. I'll share my screen and we'll get started. As we go through the topic areas, I might ask you to unmute for a brief second so I can have a little bit of an interaction. And then we'll go through the content and we'll have hopefully about 10 minutes at the end for any kind of questions or discussions that come up. What I'd be curious about is at the end of the talk, if you could make a note of one thing that you are now thinking about differently. Yeah, that would be a good takeaway for you all to have as a personal takeaway at the end of the talk. All right. Can I share? Is my screen visible?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
And you're looking at the slide, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So here, this is where I am. You're going to see a QR code that will allow you to sign up for my newsletter. Totally up to you. And you can also find me on my website, evolveagility.com. The reason I'm here is I want to reframe how we think about frameworks. So my first question to you all, if one or two people can unmute and tell me, what is it? What do you see?
A leaf.
A leaf. Thank you, Brian. I'm also holding something in my hand. Can you tell me what is that?
It looks like another leaf.
Is it the same thing, though?
No.
No, right? You see, what you're looking at is a sketch of a leaf. What I'm holding is a leaf. So there's a difference between something that is represented versus the actual thing. So let's try again one more time. What is the next thing that you see?
Leaf again.
So what am I holding, CS, in my hand?
Leaf, same green color leaf.
Yeah, yes. However, what you're looking at is the picture of a leaf. What I'm holding is the actual leaf. And the big difference is what is the capability. This particular leaf, when it was on a plant, could do photosynthesis. That particular sketch or a picture cannot perform that function. So what I want to start off with is to first set the stage. There are two kinds of mental models. The first kind of a mental model is a descriptive model. This is something that we use to describe something else which is existing in the real world. So when I draw a sketch of a leaf, I am not generating a leaf. What I'm generating is my understanding of that leaf at some level of abstraction, which is different from the actual leaf. The second kind of a mental model is described as a normative model. This normative model is the way we think about how the world ought to be. And once we adopt that frame, then we fit the world into our frame. So, with this distinction, what you are going to see in the rest of the talk is I will be describing some models. Those models will be loose approximations because if you want to really experience what it feels like, what it is, you'll have to actually instantiate the whole system in your own organization. But I'm going to accentuate certain elements that are important for the topic that we are discussing here. The second, the normative model, is I'm going to discuss some frameworks. And when we discuss these frameworks, it is important to keep in mind that the frame that you use decides how you're going to fit your work inside the frame. So with these two, you'll see how the story progresses. Before we go there, I have another question. Is there any framework that either of you follow for healthy living? I put some examples like diet frameworks, keto, Atkins, caveman I've heard is the latest trend. There's also a couch crunch for exercising. It's my favorite. What you do is you sit on a couch, put a bag of chips at the end of your toes, and you reach out for the bag of chips while you're trying to control the remote. It's a framework that will give you a six pack. My curiosity is how do we know like which framework should be trusted and which framework should not be trusted? Nissa. I think someone had their hand up, but it's okay. So here's a way I try to look at frameworks. You see, when we adopt a framework, the opening statement was that we fit the world into our frame. So the reason we adopt a framework is because the framework professes a goal that you are going to achieve when you adopt that framework. When I adopt the Atkins diet framework, the expectation is that if I follow the Atkins diet, then I will have better body weight management. So if I do something that is aligned with that framework, I can now self-correct my own behavior, my own actions to be in line with what the framework elements are. Because if I do that, then I'm going to achieve my goal. So effective frameworks are frameworks that actually help you to achieve your goal. And once you have achieved your goal, you can now look at better problems, a better class of problems to solve. Whereas frameworks like Couch Crunch that profess that you're going to get a six pack, but it doesn't, is going to walk you down through a series. The first is you don't really get it. The bag of chips has to be Lay's. Like there's a special nuance thing that you didn't understand. And then they will question whether you really did it. Like, did you have exactly how we prescribed it? Or they will question, did you try hard enough? The last resort for a charlatan is to say it depends, because then you can have a large variety of response to whatever objection that comes through. The end goal with charlatan frameworks is to keep you trapped in the same place. Most likely, you'll be worse off than you were before. So this is one way that you can detect whether you are following an effective framework or a charlatan framework, is whether you're achieving the goal that the framework says you will achieve if you adopt that framework. I'm going to start with the first framing. Yes, Glenn.
You just transitioned from model to framework. Did I miss something there?
Yes. Models are essentially frames of references. So when you use a model, you're essentially using a frame of reference. When I describe a leaf, I'm using a descriptive model. So people can look at that sketch and say, yep, that looks like a leaf and not like a duck, But it is not the leaf. And that's the important thing to recognize, that it is still a model. The other is that there is a model which is not something which we use to achieve a goal. You see, and that's a normative model. So there are two kinds of models: a model that describes the real world versus a normative model that expects you to normalize your behavior in line with the model so you can achieve the goal that the model says you will get.
Right. I understood that part, but then you introduced framework. There was a transition there.
Yes. So if you break down the word framework, the work that you do inside the frame is what we call a framework. Okay. And that frame is the normative model that you are using, because the frame that you use will decide how you work inside the frame. And we'll look at it from three different frames, multiple frames actually, because reality never really fits into just one box. Yeah. So we're going to use multiple boxes or multiple frames. The first framing is project framing. You're going to see project framing where the boundaries of the frame are set on cost, schedule, scope, and some forecasted benefits if you finish the project. Now, in order to fill this particular frame, you're going to prepare a plan. This plan is prepared from an inside-out perspective. In other words, you will ask people inside the company to estimate what the cost will be, what can be done, what are the benefits that we're going to get. And this plan will essentially involve changes to many apps, components, or functional tasks. The objective of this plan is to control the worker. In other words, the purpose of creating the plan is to decide how the worker is going to perform their task. So the object under control is the operator or the worker. This type of an approach or project framing was used in industrial part manufacturing. The way it operated was if you have a shop floor, in the shop floor, there is typically a production manager. The production manager has received an order, say to produce 10,000 widgets by the end of the month. The production manager will then talk to a coordinator, typically the foreman, and they will establish some kind of allocation calendar. And they'll say, you know, Mr. Foreman, you have to produce 2,500 parts per week so I can meet my quota of 10,000 parts per month. The foreman will then go to the machine operator, who is the worker, and they will take on an assignment where they will be given a target of doing, let's say, 500 parts per day. So now if I have a gap between 500 parts per day, the foreman has some room to make adjustments so he can or she can meet the target of 2,500 parts per week. And if the foreman misses the target, then the production manager has some room to cover for 10,000 parts per month. Notice what is happening here. Here, there is a plan that comes top down, which translates into an assignment to a level below. The person who's been assigned now has to provide update to the foreman. The foreman has to provide an update back to the production manager. The entire system operates on a performance and bonuses promises system. You know, this is Tayloristic model where if you produce according to your quota, then you're going to receive your compensation. If you achieve more than your quota, then there is some bonus or you will not be penalized. It's really a motivational metric, whether you get money or you don't get fired. It's at the end of the day is a motivational measure or control that is being used. What you will see in the shop floor is they will have some version of a Gantt chart. What a Gantt chart at its heart is a two-axis chart, where on the x-axis you have time, and on y-axis you have things that need to be accomplished according to a schedule. Here's how the shop floor production manager was copied into the IT shop. This is pre-Agile. And I'm now talking about 1980s, 1990s. In the IT shop, the production manager was a project manager. The production shop plan was a project plan. The foreman was an application manager who created a resource allocation where an individual was assigned some amount of task hours on a weekly basis, and the operator or the worker was a functional worker. Now, the same thing, the same system in the fake Agile model translates into having a team-level product owner with a team backlog with upfront story point allocation based on some average story points per sprint to the functional worker, a developer or a tester inside the sprint with detailed task-level assignments made for the entire sprint. If you're using anything similar to a capacity calculation, you're primarily trying to figure out how to fill in the available capacity of my computer machinist, so I know that they are fully utilized for that week, for that month. Now, in manufacturing systems, these small parts like nuts and bolts, they get assembled into components. Here, again, the approach is to have a line manager who is providing control over the shop manager via a Gantt chart, where the line manager says, I need to produce N number of engines, so you are going to provide me 10,000 screws, because for 20 engines, I need 10,000 screws. And the chain of event is still the same, where there is a plan and an assignment and a update and report going up back to the manager. In larger IT units, the same pattern replicates itself, where you're going to see a line manager is now a program manager, and in fake agile or bureaucratic agile implementations, you'll find this role to be called a product manager or some kind of architect or engineer. The production plan gets into projects plan, which ultimately becomes a PI plan into a fake agile system. The crew that is working on the shop floor is now your fake agile team with planned velocity targets for every single sprint, perhaps expectations that people will work on weekends to meet the production quota. I think if we should bring back bonuses for people or overtime pay for people who are working over weekends in IT systems, but that's a long story that I will not unpack. How does that get much, much bigger? The end goal for the company is to produce a car. So the plant manager now works with the line manager, who then works with the shop manager, and the system is still the same. I have a Gantt chart that creates a plan, which passes down the assignment, and people across the line provide me an update and report that gets assembled into the status of where we are at. My jargon filter is going red, so I will not read out all the details over here about what it looks like in a fake bureaucratic organization. What you'll find in fake bureaucratic agile implementation is there is some kind of a pre-planned assignment of backlog items to teams ahead of time for the entire quarter, maybe 6 months, and some kind of a release train backlog prepared at the shop level. The prominence of plant manager converting into production line manager into the production shop manager is still the same pattern that we are seeing with portfolio manager, program manager, project manager, or product manager, and people manager. One of my favorite cartoons is Pinky and the Brain. So I'm wondering if you are pondering what I'm pondering. I'll let that question just sit on your head for now. For those who have not watched Pinky and the Brain, it's a hilarious cartoon series where the brain concocts plans of world domination. And every single night, they come up with this grand plan that next day when the lab opens, they will figure out how to break out of the lab and take over the world. And Pinky is just happy-go-lucky guy because he knows like it's not going to work out. To put the nail on the plans, I have a question. How many Home Depot trips does it take for you to finish one simple weekend project? My personal experience, thank you, Doug, 5. Yes, my personal experience, at least one more than I have planned. So notice this. For 2 days, and I'm only speaking for myself, you must be much better than the rest than us. It takes me at least one extra Home Depot trip, and I'm only planning for 2 days of work. So I'm always questioning, what confidence do I have in preparing a plan for 10 people for a month? Like, how likely is that plan actually going to be, that it will actually unfold as I plan for it? This phenomenon called the planning fallacy was talked about by Daniel Kahneman and Amir Tversky, and they are considered to be the part of behavior economists, and they won the Nobel Prize, a lot of credibility behind their empirical research on why people are unable to plan. And one of the key elements about the planning fallacy is how human cognition works. When we plan for something, we are thinking about concrete steps that lead from one progress to another progress until finally the project objective is achieved. This is how we plan. This is how we think when we are not doing the work. When we start doing the work, our thinking flips. We no longer think in terms of concrete steps, but we think in terms of concrete impediments, the reasons or things that are in our way to finish the job. So our approach to delivering on project should take into account the reality, not the sketch, not the Gantt chart that we use to describe what is actually happening. The core problem with Gantt chart thinking is that we take the problem and we break it down into a sequence. And you are going to see this type of a stepwise function where there is a group of people who decide what needs to be done and a totally different group of people who have to develop the solution. And between these two, there is a handoff. So this type of an approach, I'm calling a less integrated problem-solving approach, where one group of people decide what the problem is, create this, design the solution, and then pass the solution to other people to go implement. It is also described as the design bid build trap. In the Agile Manifesto, we've talked about business people and developers must work together daily, primarily to avoid getting into the design bid build trap. In the design bid build trap, you have a set of planners who create a framework, which is a Gantt chart of how tasks will be scheduled and what controls will be put. And then construction and design is viewed as two separate activities. So the architects or UX experts will do their design, and then they're going to toss up that design to a group of developers to go implement. And then the story of a typical waterfall project unfolds, where the product as built is different from as designed, and as designed is completely different from what was expected that would solve the problem. If you're using some version of an Excel spreadsheet where you have a project with a plan of what skills to use at certain week periods, and then you are allocating task hours to individuals, for in this particular case, Adam is expected to work 20 hours on week 1 on project A and 10 hours on project B, then you are participating in the design bid build trap. It's a great fiction to get the project funded, but it will not get your project delivered. The second framing, which is a totally different framing called product framing. So I'm now shifting from the project frame into the product frame. In the product frame, you have to step outside your company and you have to look at a product from outside in. For example, when I look at this pen, I don't see the number of meetings that they've had to agree on the form of the pen. What I see is what does it cost? What are the capabilities of this pen? Will I use this pen again or purchase it again, which is my retention? And how much value do I think it provides to me using the measures that I consider as a customer? For example, I like this pen because the writing is very smooth and it's bold. This is not expressing the value of the product in story points, or in some business case, it is expressing from my perspective of why I want to use this pen and buy it again. In this particular frame, when I take the outside in perspective, in the realm of software or product development, my opportunities are tiny projects that I'm pursuing to satisfy my customer. And in that pursuit, the object under control is product integrity. The object under control is not the worker, but the quality of the product that I expect to put in the marketplace. Is that the quality that my customer will appreciate and will want? And in this pursuit, a tip, expand your product definition and shrink your project size. The reason I say that, and you'll learn about this when we talk about the risk frame, is when your projects are bigger, the chances that you will make a bigger blunder is much, much higher. Whereas if your projects are smaller, you'll find out much sooner how many Home Depot trips does it really take to finish your home improvement project. Let's look at how it happens in manufacturing, the product frame. And I'm now going to use the Toyota production system or the lean assembly plant. In the lean assembly plant, What you will find is on the assembly line, there is a card called the and-on card. The purpose of the and-on card is to stop the line. This and-on card runs across other shop floors, vendors, people who provide parts and components as well. Here, when there is a issue, when I'm trying to do the work, the worker is empowered to pull the and-on card, and the plant manager or the line manager or the shop manager or the foreman converge to the problem as opposed to reports being sent to them. So here, what is happening from an organizational hierarchy is whenever there is a problem, it is signaled using the and-on card, and that and-on card triggers a response in the organization where people go to the problem as opposed to sending reports about the problem up the chain. And this directionality is extremely important. What you'll also find in lean systems is we use customer demand as a pull signal to do just-in-time production. Now, I won't go into more of the details around it, but what would be helpful is to see what does it look like when we do software product development, and where is my and-on card in software or lean digital product development. Here, my and-on card is the mainline development. What mainline means is we don't have branches. In the mainline development, we use continuous integration server, or the behavior of integrating continuously using automated test cases to signal when the build has failed. And as soon as the build has failed, the response within the team, within a pair, within the organization, within the IT department is to converge towards the problem and discover why the build has failed, not ask for reports about how many times the build has failed. So you fix the problem when the problem occurs, and in that pursuit, you learn what challenges you really have, as opposed to what challenges we think we might have. In other words, you want hands-on problem solving from architects, designers, and engineers, and the trigger for that hands-on problem solving is whenever the build fails. And that's the and-on card in lean digital product development. In terms of Kanban, what you will also see, we use the and-on card by creating a work in process limit. And the purpose of this work in process limit is to signal upstream that there is a bottleneck. So for example, if we have a lot of things in development and we have hit our WIP limit, the first responsible action is to not continue to do discovery and generate new ideas, but figure out why we're not able to develop what we already know needs to be done. And this focus on protecting the bottleneck and signaling a need for managers and people to come to the problem is what the function of your work in process limit is. Scrum uses the Kanban or the and-on card differently because in Scrum, we have an implicit pull mechanism. What I mean by implicit pull is as a goal-oriented framework, you have an overall goal for what you want the product to be. You know what your goal for the next sprint is, but you are not committing to a set of backlog items or a goal that will come after this. Only after we pursue this goal and learn from it that we will learn what are the impediments, and based on those impediments or roadblocks, you'll get to decide what's the next best sprint goal to pursue so you can shorten your path towards achieving your product goal. All of these approaches, which is your lean digital product development, Kanban, or Scrum, they are both more integrated problem-solving approaches. In both of these approaches, there is concurrent and incremental development of requirements and trade-offs. This is not something that happens in isolation where one group of people designs and other people implement. Here, requirements, design, architecture are built collaboratively with people who are engaged in that problem-solving domain. The impact of taking a more integrated approach versus a less integrated approach is on the cost of change. When you have a less integrated approach, your requirements get bigger, which makes it increasingly difficult to make changes to these requirements. Your architecture and design gets upfront locked into certain tools or technologies, but if you were to approach it from a more integrated standpoint, you leave more options open to how you could use a different tool or technology to achieve the same goal for your product. My recommendation, nail it before you scale it. Dedicate a team of cross-functional experts for each product or service team. Don't allocate people on fractional basis, and then prepare a single intake. This could be a backlog or a Kanban board mechanism of customer-centric opportunities, and focus on how we can see the work moving from left to right, from idea stage into delivery, not focus on are we utilizing the people 100%. In other words, watch the work, not the worker. The third frame that I want to bring in is the difference between a physical product versus a digital product. In the physical product, like in the case of this particular screw, which has the same interface, plus Phillips screwdriver that can be used to turn the screw, a set of threads on the shaft of the screw, and the width of the screw. The problem here in physical products is I have to pay a fixed cost to set up a factory, and then I have a per unit cost for building each screw. Whereas in the digital world, the first working instance takes up all the cost, and then recreating a digital screw again is very cheap. It's practically non-existent. So the economics model that we participate in with digital products is different from manufacturing physical products. In physical products, industrial approaches matter. Here, we have a set of raw materials with very low variety. There's probably a quality control system that makes sure that you get standardized raw material. And now you have machinists who need to be experienced in performing the tasks so I can generate more of the same. Whereas in digital products, we have customer needs that have a very high variety. In here, I need problem solvers who need to have experience in the domain, but they also need exposure to the domain because they are never creating the same thing over and over again. They're always creating a new solution based on the problem space that they are trying to work in. Here in unit economics, efficiency is okay. In solution economics, I need to solve the problems effectively. Effectiveness is the more important parameter of judgment, whether I am generating output or am I generating outcomes for my customers. Another frame is to use the risk frame. Most of you are probably familiar. If you are a classically trained project manager, you would have heard of this term called regression to mean. The regression to mean is a property of a normal distribution or a bell curve distribution, where if you take a large sample of data points, all of them will converge towards the average. An example would be the height of people in the United States. The average height of people inside the United States is somewhere about 5 to 7 or 8, like 5 feet 8 inches for men at 21 years old. So the likelihood that you're going to run into someone who is 10 feet tall is practically zero. Yeah, you will run into, and I had the experience of being in the elevator with the Miami basketball team. Yeah, I did feel very small at that time, but that is one incident out of a million times I've been in an elevator. Yeah, so they were like 7 feet tall, but I'd never encountered a 10 feet tall individual. A different kind of a distribution is called a fat-tailed distribution. In the fat-tailed distribution, the spread is very, very wide. In other words, you can describe a fat tail as the body of the distribution is rising. And in this particular example, what I'm showing you is of 1,000 observations, both of these distributions have the average 0 and the standard deviation is 1. But notice how the shape of the distribution is totally different. The red, which is the fat tail, has much wider tail, fatter tail, longer tail than a normal distribution, which does not have any values that go 6 times, 10 times off the average. So what is happening in software is we are not experiencing normal distribution, we are experiencing regression to the tail. In other words, what I'm trying to describe here is that the risk that your project will go on a cost overrun is 1 in 6, but when it does go off the average, your company goes down with it. And I'll repeat it. The number of projects that occur, if you take, say, 100 of those, you're probably going to see 99 will be done on time, but the one that does not get done on time will destroy the entire company. And that's the empirical evidence that we see from the work that Professor Bent Flyberg has done. He has the biggest database of IT projects to date, using public and private IT project data. And what he finds is on an average, IT projects take 400 to 47% longer. However, there are cases where the cost overruns are 10 times and longer than that. If I were to remind you, healthcare.gov is one great example of an IT project that cost tremendously more than what it was projected to cost. What I did is I looked at that particular empirical study and I created a simulation. In this particular simulation, I simulated 1,000 IT executives. And the way the simulation ran was they were all given $100 or 100 units of budget for the year. And in one simulation, their bet size or project cost size was ranging between 1 to 5. And in the other run, they had a budget where the project size minimum was 5 and maximum was 10. Anytime they roll anywhere from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the project is on time, their budget does not get used. But anytime they roll a 6, they have to pay 5 times the cost of the project that they have used. And then I ran 1,000 simulations. When I run these simulations, what you will notice is when the budget for a project is smaller, 1 through 5, the executives in overall last for at least 30 rounds. Whereas here in this simulation, they all exit the system. In other words, the budget goes to 0 and in many cases negative 40. In other words, the company had to borrow money to get the project done and still the project was late. So if our goal is to survive IT project cost overruns, the number one strategy, and all other strategies are subordinate to this, the number one strategy is to execute smaller and smaller projects, which is why we talk about tiny projects. Start there, and then you can optimize on your architecture, your design, everything else. But the number one thing is reduce the project size. You see, the essence of scaling Agile is primarily about converting coordination problems, which is the design, bid, build trap, where you coordinate. It's a transactional relationship. The objective of scaling Agile is to convert these transactional problems into relational problems, which requires collaboration. And this is the core pattern that you will see in Agile from ground all the way up to the top. When we say we are doing pair programming, we have 2 people performing a task together where they set up together, perform the task, and then reset. So now they can go and do something else. When we talk about 2 teams working together, especially in large-scale Scrum, we say, let's set up together as Team A and Team B by doing a joint sprint planning, and then build a product increment at the end of the sprint. All of these little flips from coordination into collaboration is going to help you to improve the performance of your scaling approach. As a corollary, any approach that recommends coordination by definition is not an Agile approach or an approach that scales Agile well. The reality in most organizations is you probably have a centralized IT and there are various cost centers and there is some kind of a revenue driver. Many of your coordinators are probably going into a host of meetings where primarily their mode of communication is to report up on a plan, most typically using a red, green, yellow status to describe what's going on in the company. My recommendation is if you cannot structurally change your organization, look at a group of red, green, yellow status meetings and convert it into a single Kanban board. Bring all of these people in front of a big board to visualize all the work that is flowing through the system. Here in this particular example, the product owner group is looking at all the work that is going to feed each one of these teams. Many of them were not practicing Agile at all. However, because the product folks were agreeing on what do we really mean when we say do this, so they have to agree on the content of it, and also prioritize on the work that needs to be done first, the teams knew what to work on and where to extend help to other folks. In other words, step one is to bring the information to everybody so everyone knows the whole of the organization so they can make local decisions that are better informed. It's also much, much better to have a Kanban board rather than a red, green, yellow status meeting because here people know exactly who to talk to. In other words, if I'm stuck here and I'm working on this item, I can look at who else is working on that item and I can directly go and speak to them, as opposed to raising an escalation to my manager who will then go to another manager who will then tell the other person that you need to talk to me. Relationships get spoiled when managers have to remind people to go talk to each other. It's much better if you could just talk. Another guide from Large Scale Scrum. Let's look at 3 different frameworks. I've looked at Kanban. I want to look at 2 more. The first one here is called Nexus. In Nexus, I'm not too interested in the details of how to do facilitation in the meetings, but notice structurally. In Nexus, there is a single PO, there is a single product backlog. At the end, all of these Scrum teams, they produce a single product increment. The structural element in Nexus is that there is a named integration team. Members of the integration team could be volunteers from these Scrum teams, or it could be a staffed team of known people who are full-time in the integration team. The concept of managing dependencies on Nexus is that all of these dependencies are the responsibility of the integration team. In other words, when this ecosystem of multiple teams working with a single PO, looking at a single backlog, agrees on a sprint iteration goal, the integration team can veto the goal and say, we can't integrate all of this, therefore let's adjust our goal. Yeah, so they are the people who are ultimately held accountable for producing the single product increment. This type of an approach, I feel, works better when you have vendor teams, where vendor teams may not be engaged for the whole duration of the project. In other words, they are engaged for a short period of time. So you need folks inside your company who are staffed to be the integration team. They can take the work, integrate it, so they're at least informed about what work the vendor has performed. So in future, they can do something better. The next approach is large-scale Scrum. Large-scale Scrum, similar in many respects. In large-scale Scrum, single PO, single backlog, they don't use the concept of a single iteration goal, but I won't nitpick. Single product increment, the only difference here is there is no named integration team. As opposed to identifying a group of people who are identified to be the integration team, integration is an emergent problem-solving domain. What I mean by that is depending on the work that is being done, different members of different teams will say, we need to integrate, or they will just go and talk to the individual to figure out how to integrate that product. In the long run, I find emergent problem solving or self-organizing on dependencies to be far more robust than having a named integration team, especially in environments where you have dysfunctional, and I'm using the word dysfunctional to imply managers who don't go to the problem, but they expect reports. In those type of an environment, it is very easy for management to blame the integration team. But unless it is very difficult to blame an ecosystem of 50 people, they have no choice but to look at themselves and say, what are we doing that prevents our teams to integrate the product? Nexus, I like to equate it to the sheepdog. The metaphor here is that of a sheepdog that is getting all the dependencies together and herding them so that we can build a product increment at the end of the sprint. I'll equate less to a snow leopard, partly because it's my favorite animal, and it's also an animal that survives and actually thrives in one of the most difficult terrains. What I find personally in organizations when they are in deep trouble, they end up doing less anyways. They may not call it that, but they will all get into a room, plan together, manage dependencies as they show up, and make sure that the product is shippable at some regular interval. My concern with Scrum of Scrums or Scrum at scale is it feels to me like a bunch of turtles on top of other turtles. The attraction for Scrum at Scale occurs in organizations that are used to hierarchical escalation meetings. And these managers, they want a place in the scaled, agile, whatever system that they're going to create. So they send representatives to play the telephone game inside the Scrum of Scrums system. The literature on what they describe at Scrum at Scale is also very convoluted. I could not make sense out of it. But still, it is much better than the chicken, bear, fish framework, where you get the risk profile of hanging out with a bear, the flight of a fish, and the courage of a chicken. There's a difference between faking it and making it. If you're going to fake it, don't use Agile. Like, go all in with your project plan approach, because that's what you're essentially doing. Like, deliver it as a standard waterfall project. If you look at reality for what it is, you have a better chance of improving it. But if you do project plans, but you think you're doing Agile, then it's only downhill from there. If you're going to make it, you'll have to adopt the product frame and shrink the project frame. In other words, projects should be tiny projects. In digital world, tiny means less than a week. The only reason you cannot do less than a week project is because you have bureaucratic systems that will take you 5 months to prepare any project of any size. So therefore, you prefer creating 5-year projects instead of creating 2-week projects just because of the paperwork. So get rid of that paperwork, you'll be able to create smaller projects. What you'll find is in ecosystems that are trying to fake it, they're going to say, what's after Agile? What you'll find in ecosystems that are making it is they're going to track customer satisfaction, employee engagement, improvement in quality. The thing that will not change in a fake system is you'll still have the same quality problems, the same structure, the employee engagement will still be down. What will not change in an organization that is making it is their mission as an organization will still be the same. Like, they'll pursue whatever their organization's mission is, only much, much better. I'll pause here. I think I'm ready to take a few questions. At Evolve Agility, we help with agile transformations. We help teams to accelerate from wherever they are at. We also provide training services. So you'll find all of this on our website. And like to see if folks want to ask any questions or have any conversation.
Hey, folks, this is the time when you want to ask questions. So if either shoot at will or raise your hand if you want to be super polite.
I have some chat questions here, so maybe I can start off with that while people.
If you can quickly pick one, yeah.
Okay, so I'll start. I think Nawaz, you have a couple of questions. What Nawaz said is, I'm seeing the rise of Monte Carlo method lately. Is it solely a risk frame? It's mostly touted by Kanban practitioners. So Monte Carlo is a fantastic approach. Unlike games of chance that you play at a casino, where you know the dice has 6 sides, in the real world, you don't know how many sides your dice has. In other words, you would be playing the game with 100-sided dice. So how do you figure out how many sides are there? The real answer is you don't. So therefore, you play Monte Carlo simulations to discover what is the probability distribution of a particular system. So Kanban practitioners use the Monte Carlo simulation to forecast the most likely release date with some % confidence. That requires a huge sample size. In other words, you can't improve your forecast with only 5 or 6 data points. You need a much bigger sample size. The problem in the real world is, when do you have enough of a sample size? So that's what Monte Carlo simulation is trying to solve for. I would recommend it. When you run Monte Carlo simulations, you will find answers that are more realistic and less acceptable to your executives. So it's much, much better to reduce the size of the project than to forecast how long will a project will take if it is estimated to be 1 year. Because Monte Carlo will tell you it is going to be about 10 more years, but you may not survive 10 more years to see the project finished. Yeah, so which is why that's my take on there. CS, you had a question. What is the URL link to review this webinar recording slides again, or will we receive via email? So if you sign up for the newsletter, I'll send you the PDF. Gene, you're going to put the video online on YouTube at some point, so
I
that's
will. I definitely will. Yeah. As long as
Okay.
yeah.
Third question, they used to have Nexus Plus, but I don't know if it's still relevant. I don't know either. As long as they haven't changed the core of it, I'm not too worried about plus plus. Money is the root of all evil, and so is the funding model in the orgs. I will strongly disagree. Yeah, and I'll kind of summarize it briefly. You see, I'm not great at manufacturing pens, but I want to enjoy manufactured pens that satisfy me. So I do things that make money so I can pay the artisans or craftsmen who can make a pen that satisfy me. And that's the beauty of the market system. The market system frees me up from having to figure out every single thing that I need in my daily life. So I don't think money is the root of the evil. I do feel funding models need to change. And what I mean by that is the funding model has to be based on actual customer outcomes. In other words, I should talk about what my customer retention rate will be and what price can I charge for a particular product and evaluate my organization end to end, not just on the project cost performance. Because even if I meet my project cost performance, I may not be able to survive in the market because the projects were successful, but the product was a failure. And the big reason why we adopt the product frame is so we can break down the barrier between business and IT. That's the core. Like if you break down the barrier between business and IT, you will adopt a product frame as a natural fit. I'll pause at that.
Thank you for that. So, Dhaval, probably we can take another question from the crowd.
Okay.
Folks, anyone else?
I think Glenn.
Okay. Thank you. Good talk. I have the biggest problem I see is a lack of emergent behavior at the management level. Can you speak to that? Any thoughts, tips, what you've seen, what you suggest?
Yeah, that is bureaucracy in disguise, Glenn. Yeah. Well, see, bureaucrats who know they are bureaucrats are a fantastic service to society. When I go to my DMV and they say I need to fill out this form in order to get a license, they don't judge me based on any other parameter other than the form is filled correctly. And they know they are bureaucrats, so life is good. It's when bureaucrats who think that they are not bureaucrats, that's when we run into trouble. And the easiest way to detect a bureaucrat in disguise is they will never leave their desk. They will continue to ask for reports and dashboards to be sent to them, but they will refuse to go to where the problem is actually occurring. Because when they do that, it puts their skin in the game and they get revealed. So you cannot change that mindset through coaching because their salary depends on not understanding it.
And that was my question. What have you found to be effective in that other than firing people?
You can't fire people either. You see, like, because I don't have that control. So as a grassroots change agent, the best thing you can do is to build better visualizations or reports so that they can see the impact of it. I think people have the opportunity to shed their mask and actually participate in the system if there is some kind of safety for them. And one of the simplest hacks, simplest in terms of idea, difficult in execution, is to change the entire reporting slides. Whatever PowerPoint deck you're using, anywhere you see a Gantt chart, convert it into something that is a dynamic chart. Cycle time, lead time, burn down, hell, even that is much better than a Gantt chart. Like, get rid of Gantt charts in the company and you'll bring transparency into the organization.
That's thought-provoking. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, for the question. And Dhaval, I think we're at the hour, so I do want to keep this, strictly time boxed. So I want to thank you very genuinely for finding the time to come out and give this very enlightening presentation. It's really loaded with interest and information. So I'll make sure I have this video recording available for those that want to replay it or share it further. And of course, I'll have your materials as soon as you send them to me available as well. So I want to thank everyone for joining, folks, and wish you all a good weekend up ahead. Stay dry, stay in the shade because it's going to be hot in certain parts of the world. And once again, thank you.
Thank you.
Noel, many thanks to you personally.
Yes, thank you, Gene. I'm here if anyone wants to talk for 3 or 4 minutes. I don't know, Gene, if you have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes.